I think that's good. That's been a big concern of mine is that like especially in terms of people trying to convert like Hearthstone players and stuff like that are used to more like kind of letting the random sometimes make up for their lack of planning or calculations. Obviously, planning is going to be important regardless. But what I find in a game like Prismata is because it's so deterministic, a single mistake will tend to snowball in terms of like let's say you're 1 gold off on something and then that makes it so you have to wait a whole another turn to buy something, which then affects what you can buy that turn, and so on and so forth. And it tends to have a big, long, chain of events that were dependent on that one mistake you might have made, especially during an opening. I mean, do you find that's a big problem for new players that will, tend to just train wreck a game off of a simple miscalculation or mistake?
Well, new players they don't usually go on the ladder right away, so it's not like they're train wrecking games against other players. They may do that against the bot and they'll just restart, and I don't think people have a problem with that. I think like the sort of off by one calculation, or I'm 1 gold short, damn it, like that irritates everybody. But a lot of the time, it doesn't necessarily come down to planning, like, oh, I should have bought one less drone last turn, because maybe that's bad too. I mean, sometimes you just sort of get unlucky with your build, or you don't necessarily pick the right order to buy things, or whatever, and you try again next time. And I think that's the philosophy of most players. We've experimented with units like, say, a unit that would let you sell a drone for 2 anytime you want it. And you could use it to fix up these kind of mistakes that you made. And it kind of like, it helped in one way, but it also created other types of opportunities where you would actually just want to sell your drone every time you did a certain play, and the new most optimal play, just the sort of the finish line gets moved, or the goalposts get moved.
It definitely seems like there's a lot of things that do sacrifice drones still, though.
Yeah, oh yeah, definitely. But I'm just saying, as a sort of mistake prevention tool, the ability to like sell a drone at any time for 2 gold is is something that we tested out, and we didn't really like it enough to make it like an omnipresent part of the game. Keep in mind that back in the day, you couldn't even store any gold. So if you were 1 gold short on a turn, you were screwed. It was bad. So I think people, maybe super high level players, they're at the level where buying something 1 turn late, or losing 1 gold worth of value is, really hurts their winning chances. But at the low level, it's not even close to that. Like new players don't live in that world. It's like a new player playing chess. If they lose a pawn, it's almost inconsequential, because the amount of swinging back and forth that's going to go on between the two players is so much higher than a pawn that, it drops their win rate from 50% to 48% or something. Whereas with experts, losing a pawn is like game over, because they're so good at exploiting every little edge and not giving an inch as the game goes on. So I'm not worried too much about that. There are some swingy situations that happen later in the game, like say you're a new player and you just allow your opponent to breach you and slaughter a bunch of Tarsiers because you forgot to buy defense that turn. And we see that happen with new players. They just go, oh, okay, well, I'll buy a Steel Splitter and some Tarsiers, end my turn, and then they get breached for 1,000,000 and die. So we try to put in more warnings to sort of prevent them from ending their turn in a situation that's probably a mistake. But other than that, we don't see massive swings. And even if they do lose like that, most players just go and play again.
Yeah, I find the breach warning is really helpful in preventing a lot of mistakes alone. I think that was one of the better features in terms of making sure people don't accidentally spacebar goof the game up.
Yeah, and the fact that it animates, that it shakes back and forth, it really attracts your attention. It's hard to miss. There might be, hold on, what was I going to say? Another feature that some people sort of they bring up is the fact that there aren't any comeback mechanics in a game with no randomness. So in a game like chess, if you're down a rook, you just lose, right? Or if you drop your queen, you just resign. And Prismata is the same type of game. If you suffer a huge blow, then you're probably just going to lose. And in fact, comparing Prismata to chess, in Prismata, if you suffer a huge blow, you're probably going to lose like within a turn or two. Whereas in chess, you can maybe sometimes still defend a while and the game goes on. But we really wanted Prismata to be a game where people weren't being dragged through the mud for a long time. Like if you look at a lot of competitive games, like say League of Legends, in League of Legends you can be in a situation where you're so far behind that you maybe have a 2% chance for your team to win, but the game actually lasts another 20 minutes because the team that's in the lead is often encouraged to play conservatively because the only way they lose is by messing up. So they just play really conservatively and win 20 minutes later, yet the team that's losing has to cling on in hopes that their opponent will make a mistake and they'll somehow be able to push forward with this 2% win rate. And we try to avoid that aspect of getting dragged through the mud in our design. So, often after you get breached, you get crushed pretty soon after. So you can just resign and go on and play another game.
I found, yeah, even when playing, like since I was playing against a really good player, and I'm horrible at the game, I did find generally that if by the time I was ready to hit good game, I was really like 1 or 2 turns away from just being demolished, even if I hadn't been breached yet. Because you can usually kind of see the writing on the wall, like, yeah, I clearly have no way. Usually it's like I have no way to defend this without losing pretty much everything, or I'm just going to get breached next turn anyways, and I can't make any kind of reasonable comeback.
Yeah, one thing we really try to do is when you lose a game of Prismata, I often ask myself, did that loss feel bad? Did it feel unfair? Did it feel frustrating? And if it did, we try and identify what the source of that frustration is and try and design around it, because we really want losses to be not frustrating in the way that makes you want to quit, but sort of, challenging in the way that makes you want to play again or learn from your mistakes. And the other thing is, with no randomness, every time you win, you feel really good about your wins because you know that it was just because of your decisions and not because you got lucky. So it certainly appeals to a different type of player or a different type of psychographic or mindset. But I think we do a good job of making the play experience fun, even for new players, even when you're like losing or you lose suddenly. I think players enjoy learning the game and it's compelling. At least I hope so.
I think you guys have succeeded for the most part. Like I never felt like I was just being beaten up by the game, abused by someone that knew the game much better. It was always clear they knew the game better and how they knew the game better. And I think you guys have done a pretty good job ironing most of that out. In terms of kind of being like, okay, let me try something again because I messed up. Are you guys considering adding like a quick rematch kind of thing? So like when you GG out, it's like, okay, good game, let's play again real quick. Because it seems like right now there's not a quick way to do that from what I saw.
Well, so the experiences that we're expecting new players to have are, mostly the missions, which, if you lose a mission, you can literally just go back a turn. You don't even have to restart. Playing the bots, we might add a take back feature in the bot games just because why not? We can add stuff like take back and bot hints and sort of more beginner friendly features in the bot games. That's not hard to add. Friendly games, we could add take back requests in friendly games. I don't think that would be terribly difficult to do since we already have takebacks in the analysis mode, so we would just have to port that over, and I'm pretty sure it wouldn't be difficult to add. I don't think people have been asking for it that much, but on the other hand, sometimes new players don't really request the features that they really need. You just have to guess.
I guess you could tie that to the oops emote, right?
Yeah. I mean, certainly for the latter, we don't want to have takebacks or even rematches. Most players don't want to play the same opponent on the ladder over and over again. So we actually we rig the ladder to avoid matching the same players twice unless there's nobody else to match them with. There's also some potential abuse if we allow players to just play each other and over again. You could do win trading or dumping or stuff like that. But generally speaking, yeah, we want to allow all these beginner-friendly features, and we'll be adding lots of them soon.
Yeah, rematch is actually what I was asking about, but it was interesting to hear your thoughts on the take-back issue. one place I understand what you're saying about the ladder and people kind of not wanting to necessarily always play the same person again even if they request a rematch. But what about like the custom game screen? So for example, during the interview with Crash, I decided to just play some games with him while we were talking, and every single time I had to keep re-challenging him to a game through the custom versus friend screen, and it would have been nice to be just been like play another match, just a quick on the game over screen button, request rematch, something like that.
Yeah, that's probably not too hard to add. We could put something in there. I mean, we get little quality of life feature requests all the time, and if they're easy, we generally try to accommodate them. I don't imagine that's too difficult to add. We could look into add something like that.
It just seemed like it would be good for because we're getting a lot of new players that just have to practice against friends because there's so many high level players. If you trying to play in the queue or something like that, or a lot of the teams trying to practice with each other, I could see both those groups benefiting from something like that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, a lot of the times when a feature is like sorely needed, we will have our inbox flooded with requests for it, or a thread will go up on Reddit with a bazillion upvotes. And if that happens, then we know, well, okay, this seems like it's important to the community, we should go for it. But we do receive so many feature requests, and we do want to move ahead with making the game and sort of building the features that we want to create to sort of expand our new player acquisition and retention, all that stuff. So we can't do every feature request, but generally if it's easy, if it's like a one-liner, then we'll do it. Like I think the other day, I don't remember who it was, one of the streamers, he was like, he said to me in the chat, or somebody said to me, I want to know how many games I have in my replay list. You used to be able to do it because you could see how many pages you were, and you knew there were 7 a page, so you could multiply. Now you can't. And so I went in less than 5 minutes and just added a little thing that, next to, replay details, it would just have the number or the index of the replay next to that. And, literally less than 5 minutes. So there are some things that we can just do. And if people request a feature and it's super easy, then I'll just do it, or I'll do it on the weekend or something like that. Something like a rematch is probably a little more difficult, but it can definitely be done in like an afternoon, certainly. And, one issue is that the more features you add, the more like places there are for bugs to come up.
Pretty much.
The more code you have to maintain. And, when features start interacting with options and sort of individual user settings, then suddenly you can have problems that are like difficult to reproduce. And then that starts to eat up an amount of time that you don't really want to be spending on some little feature request.
I guess the best features are the ones that let you cut code instead of adding it, right?
Yeah, well, but I mean, something like just putting a value in a string and displaying it on the screen, it's hard to find a way that can go wrong other than, in a way that might alert us to a bug that was there before.
Yeah. And having been a game developer myself for a while, I know how it can be when it comes to players thinking a feature is easy or hard and being completely way off base.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I tend to think almost everything that people ask us for is easy. It's just there's a difference between like 5-minute easy and 5-hour easy. But yeah. We don't get, some people will say feature request, single player campaign, and they obviously don't think it's easy. But I don't think we've got any insanely difficult features. Like even something like somebody says, I want favorites on my replays. Like that honestly isn't that hard. We would just need a little flag and a database query and some kind of screen to display it, and but like we can do it in an afternoon. It's not like it's going to kill my whole week to put that in, but it's mostly just like, well, once we add that feature, then we have to support it. We have to make sure it works. If we change the replay formatting, then the database might be kind of wonky. And so it's not just the upfront costs, but it's the underlying hidden costs that are sometimes more of a problem.
Yeah, especially if it's tying to other in development things, like you're saying, like if you change those later on, then there's too much dependencies.
Well, what ends up happening is we have a giant list of features, and it's literally like an enormous Trello board sitting somewhere that just scrolls and scrolls and scrolls. And oftentimes we can't do something right away, so we just tack it on the list, and then we go through the list and think, well, what's the most important thing that we need to put in right now, right? And it's probably not like favorites on the replay list. It's probably more along the lines of like, community most popular replays, or new players' ability to play bots on the ladder or take back moves against bots or ask bots for hints, and stuff that focuses on new users, and stuff also that focuses on retention. That's what we tend to prioritize, and sort of little easy quality of life things often slip in.
So like right now, what would you say your guys' biggest focus is in terms of what you're trying to really get done?
Well, right now, almost everybody in the company is doing something to support arena rewards and the sort of arena prizes and mini games, and the amount of work that's gone into it. We haven't really talked much about it since a blog post a long time ago when we kind of gave a preview, and we've gone so much beyond that preview. There's whiteboards in the office full of all kinds of calculations about the drop rates of different things and how the different ways that users can use currency to help accelerate their loot collecting, and just so many things from so many different angles. The art, the programming. We're doing all kinds of stuff with asset storing so that you won't have to wait a bazillion years for Prismata to load, even though it's got a ton of skins in it. It will just sort of download them in the background in a kind of quiet, as needed way. Things with the database and the real money store, and we have all of this. We have a bunch of security stuff, but we also have this backup system that we're using that records all of the transactions in two different ways. So we have all the real money transactions in one spot, and we have all of the sort of user collectible transactions in a list. So if anything ever goes wrong, we can just replay them and sort of recover the state of anybody's account. And we're testing out all these things and trying to make sure they're all top notch. And we're building automated tests for everything. Actually trying to be responsible software developers, which we're usually not. I'm usually just a person who goes in and hacks shit together, but we're actually trying to do a good job with a lot of these new features, because sort of once they go live, it's kind of for real, like it kind of counts, and we don't want to fuck it up.
I thought it was really smart from a design perspective that you guys, the way you're not making the cards collectible means, like you brought this up in your your big long post about randomness and all that, and some of the benefits the Prismata design had, and I thought it was really interesting in that you can nerf cards, essentially, or units or whatever you want to call them, without hurting anyone's collection. And coming from doing development work on a actual CCG, that was a huge issue, and there was a lot of bugs and exploits and problems with the metagame that we couldn't fix because you couldn't nerf a card that people pay tons of money for example. And so I think that's hopefully a big benefit you guys have in terms of being able to at least test more stuff without having to spend a really long time internally playtesting it.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you look at a game like Hearthstone, I think every time they fuck up designing a card, it costs them shit tons of money. And it's not just because they have to nerf it and they have to give people dust in their collections or whatever they do. It's they actually lose players because some deck is unfun to play against, or some deck feels broken, or some deck becomes so dominant in the metagame that like players quit because they're sick of playing against it and they want more variety. Like there are all kinds of issues that can come up with balance. And because it's so costly for a company like Blizzard to rebalance the cards, it really hurts them. And so they desperately need for their design team to not fuck up. And it's like a huge business risk for them if they design something screwy. Like if you look at like Leroy Jenkins or Undertaker or the Buzzard Unleashed combo, or all these things in Hearthstone that they've nerfed, every single one of these nerfs destroyed a deck archetype. And to the point of, like, even though you could dust the card that they nerfed and sort of exchange it for new cards, there are people who had spent months collecting the other cards to play in that deck archetype. And those other cards became devalued because of the nerf. And so there's so many underlying factors, and they'll lose faith in the game. Like, they won't want to build a deck because what if Blizzard nerfs that deck, right? There's all kinds of issues where it's from a PR standpoint so important that Blizzard doesn't aggressively nerf things because it will hurt people's opinion of the game. And yet, if they don't nerf things, it hurts the player experience in certain ways that are so bad. So, like, avoiding being painted into that corner is something that we really relish in and is great for our balance team.
I can confirm the exact same issues ran into in the one I worked on, where we had a specific kind of bug that was causing this one deck archetype to pretty much dominate the game, and the bug was totally fixable. Like, I could have fixed it, but I was actually not allowed to because so many people had spent money on cards to build that specific deck to where those cards would have been useless outside of that, despite all the player councils and things like that saying, like, please fix this, we feel like we have to play this deck even though we hate playing it. But because it's the only thing viable anymore, we don't have a choice. Please find some way to fix it, even though we know if you do, everyone will be super pissed and, like, quit the game. And it just totally paints you into a corner. And it became the situation where we just look at, like, well, how does Magic solve that? And the only way they really solve that is just the rotating tournament format where they rotate out cards. So it's like, okay, well, the game's broken, but it's only broken for 6 months.
Yeah, well, I mean, Magic has... they have their future league and their design team works a year ahead. And I think they generally do a pretty good job. And they just ban cards when they're too OP. But oftentimes, like, there have been combos that have been busted and Magic has, like, banned the wrong card, or they sort of, they didn't really ban the card that was the problem. They sort of banned this other card that kind of helped it. We saw with Buzzard Unleash in Hearthstone, they just ended up nerfing both cards, which is kind of funny. But I don't know. Magic, they just ban stuff, and I think people have come to expect that, and they've come to respect the game designers more as a result of it. And sure, it affects the resale value of some cards, but I think ultimately, like, Magic's user base is more mature. Most of them have been playing the game for a long time, and people aren't going to quit the game because a card that they've bought a few of or a playset of got nerfed. I think it's much different in Hearthstone because there's so many players that are young and new to the game, and maybe they only own the Undertaker deck. And if you nerf it, then it's literally like they don't have a deck anymore, so they're just going to quit.
So, I mean, it seems like and I've seen this discussed a few times, that in Prismata, most of the time, you guys nerf stuff rather than buff stuff. And I saw you kind of tried to explain why you guys took that approach, but could you kind of explain, for the benefit of everyone listening to this, why you generally nerf things rather than buff anything?
Well, so first of all, I don't entirely think that's true. I think if you look at our last couple of balance patches, there have been lots of buffs. But one thing that we do is when we release new units, when we decide how to price them or balance them, we tend to err on the side of making them strong. And the reason is mainly that we just want them to see play. We want players to gain experience with them so we can learn how they get used and whether or not changes are needed. If a unit's too weak, like maybe something like Steelforge, the problem is that, like, people just don't buy it, or they play it and lose, and then they don't play with it again. And so you don't actually learn much about the unit and how it functions and how it should work. So we often err on the side of making things too strong when we release them. And this, sort of as a side effect, later we're going to be more likely to be nerfing than buffing just because it was more likely to be too strong than too weak in the first place. And, units like Windsor are definitely an example of this. Something like Thorium Dynamo, like, we knew it was a rampy card when we designed it. No question. And when we made that decision to make it a single energy in its cost rather than 2 energy, we said, okay, it'll be rampy. You'll be able to get a huge econ off of this. Let's try it and see what happens. And, we can do that because if it's screwy, we can just nerf it. We're not, we're not chained to the wall with the threat of losing our customers if something gets misbalanced. So the fact that we have the luxury to do that means that we get to sort of try out more things, be more experimental, and I think for the most part our users appreciate it. Like we still have some people who say, bring back old Scorchilla or something like that. The Scorchilla used to cost 7 plus a red and a green and have build time 1 instead of build time 2. But old Scorchilla had like a 58% player 2 win rate or something. We're not bringing it back.
Do you think, like, I know you use a lot of numbers like that to kind of determine, like, when something's worth nerfing. Like, hey, we see how people are using this and how often it's happening. Do you think that your small player base right now may add some skew to those numbers, and you guys try and compensate for that a little bit?
Well, I'll tell you what we do. When we do those type of stats, we can filter them by the skill level of the players, whether they're playing base 5 or base 8. We can do all kinds of things to try and tease out more information. And we actually do significance tests so that, I can tell you the p-value on, the null hypothesis of Scorchilla being balanced for both players at the 7RG build time 1. I can tell you the p-value is like 10 to the minus 40 or something like that. So like we literally we have this many data points, we do the stats, and we can say, okay, no, it's pretty much busted. It's not going to be a fluke. It's not going to be a small numbers thing. It's just busted. And even with something like Windsor, which we only had up for a week or so, it wasn't before we nerfed it. We could see from the numbers already that okay, it's busted. Or at least we were seeing player 2 having a huge advantage in Windsor games. And sometimes those numbers are superficial, like maybe the players just haven't learned how to deal with it yet, or maybe the community needs time to adapt. And then we'll sometimes look at the weaker players versus the stronger players. Like if we see a unit's imbalanced at lower levels, but at stronger levels it's close to 50-50, then we kind of see it as a psychological problem where the weaker players are executing not as well as they need to be with this unit, or they're falling into a trap. Like, I think, what was the example? There was an old version of Deadeye that was really balanced in favor of player 1. And the reason it was player 1 favoring is because player 2s were going drone, blast forge, spam Deadeyes. And that was actually such a crap opening in so many situations that it was causing player 1 win rates to go up. So, every single statistic has to be taken with a grain of salt and placed within the grander context of what's actually happening in the game. And, I have so many examples that I could talk about for ages, but, we do try and be a bit nuanced in how we look at the stats.
That's good. I mean, I suppose your guys' math background makes a big difference in your ability to actually separate fact from fiction and that sort of stuff.
The other thing here, let me tell you this one, okay? So, sometime Google XKCD green jelly bean, because there's this XKCD comic that illustrates this statistical phenomenon, which at this point I just call the green jelly bean fallacy. And it's basically if you have a lot of different statistics that you're taking all at once, it's quite possible that one of those will be a big outlier just by chance. So, let's say we look at all the units and we say, well, this unit is a 1% outlier. Is that significant? Is the unit actually busted? And the answer is no, because, if you have 100 units, one of them is going to be a 1% outlier. So we actually need much stronger statistical proof when we're looking at the hypothesis that all units are balanced than we do, when we're looking at just a single unit.
Do you have to give kind of a certain amount of shock time for people to figure out how to use the unit too before you start to make that kind of decision?
Well, I mean, a lot of it is kind of by feel. Like we can sometimes throw away a few days of stats after a unit is first released, or we could even like filter by players who have played with a unit a bunch. But I don't think that there's ever been a decision regarding balance that really hinged on that type of information. Like usually it's a bit more cut and dry.